Mr. Belfiore?
Here.
Mr. Biondo?
Here.
Mr. DeGiulio?
Here.
Mr. Ludston?
Here.
Mrs. Paletti? Here. Mr. Edisivich?
Here. A quorum has been established. Oath of office for Mr. Adam McCready. Let the record show that he's not present. Make it a roll call, please.
Mr. Belfiore?
Here.
Mr. Biondo?
Here.
Mr. DeGiulio?
Here.
Mr. Ludston?
Here.
Mr. McGreedy? Mrs. Paletti? Here. Mr. Edisivich?
Here. Quorum has been established. We all rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mike, could you read our mission statement, please?
The mission of Norridge School District 80 is inspiring educational excellence in a nurturing environment.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our visitors for coming out in such big numbers on a beautiful summer night. So thank you for joining us today. A couple pieces of correspondence. A letter from Robert Schwartz. This is the company the law firm that we use for our PTAB defenses. The letter that we sent out to Mr. Adam McGreedy, and the letter that we sent to the Chief of the Police, David Disselhorth, just recapping the meetings that we had. We did receive one FOIA from Mr. Williams, and we'll go right into the administrative reports.
So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Craig Schilling, who's going to present our information on our tentative budget for the upcoming year. So Craig?
Sure.
Good evening. I'm sure some of you are here to see how we did, right?
Yep.
Obviously this is a tentative budget. They're still subject to change between now and the time it's finally adopted in September. And there's lots of things going on right now that might affect it. If you've looked in any of the newspapers and saw what's going on with our wonderful legislature and the governor, you know, the fight that's going back and forth, that will affect this district like it affects all districts in the state of Illinois. So what I want to do is just take you through the highlights of it and discuss this a little bit. First, the evidence-based model. That's what's being mentioned in all of the newspapers, and that's what the fight is over. Basically, what has been passed by the legislature is a new funding formula that combines some of the special funds we have with general state aid and tries to make it fair across the board so that districts that have higher concentrations of, let's just say, like ELL and low income will get higher amounts of money. Districts that are poor, that don't have as much property tax, be able to generate as much money in property tax, will get a little bit more money. So it kind of redistributes the money that the state has, with the caveat currently, the way it was passed in the legislature, that nobody would get any less. The governor has mandatorily vetoed it, and he's added some things that would actually change the amounts of money that all the districts get and reverse a little bit of that hold harmless in certain areas. So right now the Senate's overridden it. The House has to do it within 15 days or it goes back to starting over. So that's what that's all about. And so that fundamentally would change how schools are funded, at least from the state in Illinois. And we're waiting on that resolution. Categorical payments. I put that up here because I wanted to just make sure everybody understands that for the last number of years, there's been a backlog in bills owed by the state. I think it's like $15 billion now or some number like that. Schools are also owed money. So, for example, at the end of this last year, we had still not received 2 quarterly payments for things for reimbursement like special ed personnel and staffing and private facility costs and things like that. So this budget has 2 payments from last year and 2 this year, and we still are owed 2 payments. So there's still some money, a couple $100,000 plus or minus, that we could receive that would go into our reserves or fund balance. And when that comes, nobody knows. It could never come, or it could come at the end of this year or next year. Property tax freeze. There is not a property tax freeze currently, but it was part of Governor Rauner's proposal. That still has to be worked out. There may or may not be one. Obviously, if there is one, it has a dramatic impact on every district in the state because that part is our biggest revenue source, okay? And if that doesn't go up, then it's basically flat and it was proposed to be for 4 years. Pension payments is another thing that's been a hot topic in the newspapers, and that is shifting the cost of pension to districts. Part of the big fight that's going on right now is whether the state should pick up part of the pension costs for the Chicago public schools. So that's another thing that has to be settled on the revenue side. Medicaid and Title II. Title II is a federal program for professional development for teachers that we get money for from the federal government. And Medicaid is, we get 2 types of payment from the federal government, is for basically the health-related and health services cost of children who are in special education. The President has recommended drastic reductions in both of those. The House of Representatives and Senate are entertaining lower reductions, but we will probably get less money there, and we don't know how much that is yet. So, and then of course, the one thing that I think if you went through registration, you know that fees went up, so local fees, and so that is included in this budget on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, the tentative budget reflects the deficit reduction plan. The deficit reduction plan was for this year $750,000. Okay, it does include grade centers, which the district has implemented. It maintains the full day kindergarten, which was something the board chose to do. It reflects the increase of fees on the expenditure side. It does not. It anticipates somewhat lane changes, which are just changes in the education level of teachers that entitles them to more money. So there are some outlays of additional money that we will have to make depending on whether anybody has attained more education and so forth on salary. So with that in mind, this is where we stand at this point with the deficit reduction plan. So if you'll notice, it looks a lot like what we looked at last year. Of course, we looked at like 1 million different plans, okay? But the bottom line is that the plan that we basically chose was to go to grade centers. We anticipated saving 9 full-time teachers. We saved 7.1, but the actual cost was saved is $434,000. We said we would reduce sports and clubs because we only need them at 1 school now, not 2, because we have 5, 8, and 1 preschool 4. That is savings of about $115,000. Committee and curriculum work we reduced from $100,000 to $85,000. That was a savings of $15,000. That was in the plan. The learning center was staff was eliminated. That's a savings of almost $30,000 in 1 full-time person. Some deferment and reduction in instructional technology to the tune of about $27,000. The plan had office assistants being eliminated. That was not done. However, all of the staff is working reduced hours across the board, which that netted out to a $47,000 savings instead of the $59,000, and that's equivalent to about 1.5 FTE. Then we reduced the industrial arts program. That's basically been eliminated. The reading specialist and the field trip amount that was budgeted was just over $5,000. Total savings just under $800,000, $796,000. So as far as people goes, what the net ended up being was equivalent of 2.5 support staff, 9.1 teachers, full-time teachers, for a total of 11.6 staff total. So that's what was implemented. The goal then obviously being the 750, so that was reached. So what does that mean? This is the new projection, at least at this point. Obviously it needs to be updated later in the year once we know more information. But at this point in time, the good thing is the old line had the district running basically out of money in 2019, which is what we said, and had the district continuing $1 million deficits infinitum. If you look over here, you don't see, and one digit gets dropped, which is a really nice thing. So the deficit for this year projected is $474,000 from basically, $1.2, $1.3, $1.2 million deficits the last 3 years. Significant improvement, okay? As if any of you attended the presentations I did in the last year or so, one of the things I mention every once in a while is in school finance, the goal is to buy time, okay? So if we hadn't done this and we were still running $1 million deficit, we'd be out of money next year. At this point, if you look at the 474, we would run out of money in 3 years. So we bought in a little time, okay? It doesn't mean we're out of the woods because we still have a situation that I'm going to show you in a second that's kind of critical with the education fund. But overall, everything is basically on target as far as our deficit reduction plan. So what's the most immediate problem right now? This is a little sheet taken out of the tentative budget. It's the sheet that I always look at if I pick up any school budget, because this tells me what's happening in the operating funds, and this is where we're focusing. And you'll notice we have reduced the overall deficit to the 474 on the right-hand side, but all of that deficit, for the most part, is in the education fund. In other words, the education fund technically has a negative bank balance, okay? No money. It's in the hole, $482,000. That's what it's projected to be. The only reason that we can make that work is we have a savings account. The working cash fund is for school districts, a savings account. In a perfect world, what would happen is during the year, if we started to run out of money, we would borrow against it, and then as we got money in, we'd pay it back. So we would always put our savings account back. We have not been doing that the last year, nor this year, because we don't have the money to put back. We're spending it down. So if you subtract these two, what this is telling you is at the end of this year, that number is about $1 million. So that means if you do the math, besides this year, in 2 more years, then the money's gone. There's no savings account, and there's no money. And the education fund, if you're not familiar with that particular fund, is where we do all the educational stuff for your kids. That's where all the teachers are paid for, all the programs and everything else. So that is the critical piece, because once that working case gets to 0, then the education fund has to be paycheck to paycheck, basically. It has to be balanced every month, every year, or you have to borrow outside the school district to be able to make ends meet. So that is the most pressing issue at this point in time. We're where we should be now. There are 3 things that 3 more slides I just want to go through. Obviously, the ed fund is out of money. That's one thing that there's a takeaway here that you have to remember, that we've basically spent everything. We're now using our savings account. The second important thing is we only have $53,000 in our life safety fund. The life safety fund is what we use if something happens to one of our buildings that's critical, like if a roof starts leaking or something else. So that's not very much money when you consider how big these buildings are. It wouldn't even be very much money for a house if you wanted to remodel it, let alone 2 big school buildings. So we have very little money, and we have to be very careful if something would happen, if a boiler would go out or something. We might have a little bit we could use in our operation and maintenance fund because there was a balance there, but we're basically have to keep our fingers crossed that we don't need to, nothing happens to our buildings.